I have finally arrived at Stresa. I can't wait to submit my CV as to why I should rule the Bolivian Empire. Surely France will support my claim. Italy? What are you doing here alone? Where's France? Where's Britain? Why are the chairs all empty? No. Wait. It can't be. After all these years, an Italian focus tree?
Yes, and hello, and welcome to a Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary talking about the Italian focus tree. This is possibly the longest dev diary I have ever seen in my life, so I think we're going to have to be brief about some things just to get through it all, but feel free to use the timestamps in the description to help you get to points which might be of more interest to you. But without wasting another second further, shall we begin? So the focus of this dev diary is going to be the generic, historical, common branches of the Italian focus tree, your industry branch, your kind of military branches, and the historical path that you can take as Italy. With that, it's important to remember that because Italy already had a focus tree in the base game, I'm pretty sure most, if not everything you see in this dev diary is coming free with the Avalanche update accompanying the DLC By Blood Alone. In short, everybody should be able to be playing this when it comes out, regardless as if you buy the DLC or not. So, shall we commence? We begin by covering a brief history of where Italy is in 1936, having just been a part of the Triple Entente in the Great War, and having joined in the hopes of getting various territories. Many of these requests, however, were not honoured by the Allies during the Treaty of Versailles, and so Italy, sort of falling in on itself from the giant debt it accumulated during the war, has turned to the side of fascism under Benito Mussolini. And so in 1936 we arrive with Mussolini currently in the phases of expanding his African territories, with the Italo-Ethiopian conflict being the dominating factor of the 1936 start. With that, we see Benito Mussolini has a new trait, Il Duce, which gives him political power gain and a trade and conscription law cost reduction, which is really good, and a minor debuff to the command power increase multiplier, which isn't too bad. This trait, along with other national spirits you can see in the image, will be upgraded upon later in the dev diary, but for the most part that's your starting situation and we can cover it later. Okay, so moving on from the 1936 start, we begin talking about the map changes that will be coming with the update, which mostly centre around Italy in this conversation. Terrible pronunciations aside, we can now see that the former state of Istria has been turned into two states, a small southern state of Istria and a new northern state of Litorale, potentially? Both of these states are under control of Italy at the start of the game, and that means they've got slightly more territory facing inside Yugoslavia than what they had before. I'd also say it does appear like North Slovenia has had a wee bit of a division, and has got Ljubljana and North Slovenia as two separate points. In addition, I do think we see more carving up inside central Italy itself. I think the Alto Adige and Trentino, terrible I know, are much smaller states than what they used to be. So yeah, I think there's something to see about that, but it's hard to see without the full scale. Next up, we head to Dalmatia, where Italy still has Zara under its control, which can now be changing its name if under Yugoslav control, as well as an additional victory point of Kotor being added in the south next to Dubrovnik. Zara additionally now has 70% compliance, representing the Italian population that lived there, so it shouldn't be too bad to get population and factories from it. In terms of changes to Albania, the capital is no longer on the coast, and they've added a new port, smaller city there, so that it shouldn't be so hard for you to defend. In addition, the resource rights of Albania are now in control of Italy, kind of showing the Italian grip over Albania at this time period a little more clearly. On the flip side, something that I'm not sure is said, but in truth I don't remember, was the gap between Sicily and Albania a strait before? Like, I do not remember this being a strait. I don't think you can cross it. However, it does look like if you own both sides of South Italy and Albania, you can block off that entire coastal region, meaning you don't have to defend all those ports. That's going to make defending your coastline as Italy a lot easier. In this brief image, we see that they've added some lovely new cities all across North Italy, as well as keeping in touch with how they've been doing it previously, where country city names are now named after the language which they are in that language. So, we don't have English pronunciations for leaders and cities, they're in their respective language to the country they're in. Meanwhile, down in Sicily, we see that Sicily itself has also been split up, with Puglia making an appearance. It should be said that with new states being added, it means there's more future build potential for Italy, more factory slots you can unlock, and generally the stronger they're going to be, as well as having all these new victory points, as we can see in Puglia, which makes it even harder for them to capitulate if a lot of their core cities aren't as easily accessible. Unfortunately, moving on to the colonies, we've got some bad news coming out of Libya as compliance is down 35% from 70 to 35, showing the unrest in the region and that, generally speaking, Libya wasn't entirely pacified by Italy at this point, it was just slightly more under control. Moving on to Eritrea and the war in Ethiopia, the city of Asmara has been moved off the coast with 2 new victory points surrounding it, and a railway line has been added so that the access to the port is much better and it actually has better supply coming in for your units on that front line. It is also worth mentioning that if you were going to release yourself as Eritrea, this place is now stronger because of it. Just something to consider. So on to the next section, we're talking about the order of battle, and with it we see some new battalion types popping up. The first of which being the Militia Battalion, which is apparently supposed to represent the black shirts, which were sort of a common thematic theme of more, let's say, aggressive militant nations at the time. With them, they come with their own 3D model if you have the DLC. With this image, we can see that militia are a new type of infantry unit that have less organisation but lower training time, which means if your country is under some dire situation and you need to spam out some units, the black shirts are probably your go-to. Also, the black shirt divisions are capped divisions, which is a new mechanic I feel they're adding, which allows them to script locked divisions that can be recruited. This means they have a max cap, which means you can only recruit some within a specified limit. The second unit they talk about are irregular infantry, which is supposed to represent a more mix of different soldiers from different backgrounds that were pushed together to form a more general group of soldiers. Because of this, they have lower stats, especially organisation, because working with different people makes things harder to really coordinate, as well as having less HP, lower supply, but better equipment needs. More importantly than that though, they do have important bonuses in hills, forests, deserts and mountains, so Paradox described that they think they'd be good to garrison your colonies in Africa, but I'm really thinking about them guarding the front against France with all those wonderful mountain tiles. Following on from this, we see some images of some various troops and plane models. See here how this, what I think is a colonial division, is aggressively T-posing on the enemy. So definitely, a very overpowered unit there. The list of Italian generals, and I presume admirals too, has also gone up. However, don't expect to see any, god tier German general staff level troops. These generals are not the best, but they do have very specific traits, each of them, so you should be able to kind of pick which ones you want for which specific job and then start training them up so that you can create the best generals that you want, which is really important when you consider that, Italy has Ethiopia at the start to train generals, as well as being a participant in the Spanish Civil War. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to train up your generals, even though they don't necessarily start as the best. Now, Paradox cannot put in somebody called Prince Filiberto and not have me ask, who is this guy? So I did a quick Google, and apparently he is the son of a Duke of Genoa, which really makes me consider, is there going to be a fragmentation option for Italy with some duchies of Genoa, and can Prince Filiberto be there? Big questions, but you can't just stick in people of monarchy and not see them be used elsewhere. Come on. Moving on to political advisors, we see that there are some big changes to political advisors, far more to choose from, including a class known as the Hierarch, which can be Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice, Education and Corporations. Moving on, we see all kinds of new designer companies that Italy is going to have available, and from the early look I can see into this dev diary, it does give the feeling that Italy has a strong push towards using designer companies and really picking which ones you want for the best outcome. And the final part of this section is a note, which doesn't tease too much, which simply says that as of right now, the idea of farming too much XP in the Italian-Ethiopian War, kind of exploiting the system, might not be too good, because diplomatically the League of Nations and internally some sort of uproar may sort of upheld your ability to actually gain anything from that war and flip it on its head because Ethiopia is holding out. So perhaps farming for XP in Ethiopia won't be as powerful as it used to be. And with that, we arrive at the focus tree. Hello to all the people who skipped ahead just to see the focus tree. Okay, so the first branch we can see is talking about the Colonial Branch, which I'll just say in general is really cool that countries that do have colonies are able to have entire branches dedicated to them, because a country isn't just the country itself, it's all the countries it manages as well. So the start of the Colonial Branch has some similarities looking at the French Colonial Branch, where we can see that once you've finished your Ethiopian war logistics, you can begin the Ministry of Italian Africa, beginning to develop certain regions that you've collected over time. The Ministry of Italian Africa focus will get you a new occupation law for Italy, Colonial Police, which is available in the African states, and allows you to keep better control over the probably pretty angry Africans that you've just colonized. The focus also unlocks a decision to deal with colonial management, which allows you to train, disband and reorganize irregulars, as well as strengthening those divisions which you're using across your colonial territories. As for the developing of the different colonies, taking the focus will add a level of infrastructure and a building slot in some of the states, so not too powerful, but similar to with France, for every one of those states you have developed in, taking the regional development focus will add a factory, naval base and extra building slot to those developed states. In addition, you also unlock the ability to upgrade the colonial police, as well as get a decision to add a building slot and increase the state category of less developed states. We can see that here in Benghazi, where for 50 political power, I think you can use one civilian factory and get compliance +5, a building slot, and the state changes to a pastoral region type. I do wonder if we're taking time to change the way state types are working, whether you're going to have the option at some point to make it so that maybe some underdeveloped cities can have a massive influx of population, and then themselves be an upgraded state type, which gives them more population and more building slots. Following on down the tree, you get access to new focuses that allow you to upgrade Libya even more. We see the prospect for oil focuses still there, but also we see Via della Vittoria, which gives you more compliance across pretty much all of Libya, as well as some infrastructure. With Strengthen the Askari Corps, you get to access some of the African generals that you could have at your disposal, including the Askari officer Ibrahim Mohammed, who just looks fantastic and has an amazing hat. Continuing down the path, you can eventually get to Comandante Diavolo, which gives you access to the General Amadeo Gile. Terrible, I'm just so terrible. Who is supposedly one of the last great cavalry generals of the war, and actually lived all the way up to 2010, so yeah, a pretty interesting guy. You can see his stats here, of course early days, so he doesn't have a portrait, giving him some cavalry officer, desert fox, I think that's the fight to do with entrenchment, as well as some decent stats across the board. Let's talk about industry. So to start off, we're talking about the Italian highways, which by the way, I love the focus tree icon for, of a little truck. I mean, it's just brilliant. What more do you need? The first thing Dev Diary talks about is that Italy now has 2 national spirits directly relating to industry that can be changed throughout the focus tree. The first one is the IRI, or Reconstruction Industrielle, or the reconstruction of the industry, which gives you some good buffs towards civilian factory construction speed, as well as all of those designers I was talking about earlier, with, a lot of the industry of the country being conglomerated into this great economic powerhouse. On the flip side, Italy does not do so well in the military aspect. Research speeds for basically every type of military equipment is just down, production is down, factory output is down, stonks are not good, they are down. So it is with these two national spirits, one good and one bad, that you're probably going to have to steer the industrial path of Italy towards making a pretty, economically mobile country into one that is actually viable and not in debt and suffering and no guns. We begin with the Italian highways, which gives you some infrastructure across the board, as well as adding the Italian highways state buff, I think that is, which gives infrastructure construction speed in that state. It is worth mentioning, though, that the infrastructure level that it adds is actually quite low. So this is a casual reminder that there are so many focuses in Hoi as it stands right now, which give you like 2 to 3 infrastructure, despite the fact that they actually lowered the infrastructure cap from 10 to 5. So giving a focus that gives you, 2 or 3 infrastructure is giving you 40 to 60% of your overall infrastructure. So it's good to see that the modern focuses are getting a change, but maybe some of the old ones need one too. The central branch under Italian highways basically follows through improving a general national industry, as well as picking between whether you're putting the focus in North Italy or South Italy, with some decisions that allow you to bolster wherever you went for. On the right side, however, we have investments in Edison, which is a nod to how Italy was the very boastful first power plant in Europe, and as such you get 2 civs and consumer goods factory reduction. The further down the right hand side of the branch you go, the more you dip your toe into the world of military industry, getting some military factories and truck and light aircraft research bonus if you redirect the Alfa Romeo production. Moving through some of these images quite quickly, we can see that additionally you'll have the option to spend some political power and command power to increase the fault lines along different positions, as well as having to make a decision between increasing your production capacity or keeping your specialization buffs, which will decide whether you can maximize how much you're producing versus the quality output of what you're producing. Okay, are you still with us? We're now on to Army Branch, which is talking about, well, you guessed it, the army. And the army branches do look somewhat different to me. So to start with, the Italian Royal Army, the Regio Esercito, potentially, was not in great shape in 1936. They do okay in Ethiopia, but that's because Ethiopia is an underdeveloped African nation and Italy is a warmonger. So, they did okay there. But beyond that, they're not doing too good, so they get a debuff in the form of the national spirit, which reduces division speed, organisation, and increases land doctrine cost. The core decision at the centre of the army tree is whether you're going to go with preserving your army traditions of sort of standing the line with a big, strong army with lots of firepower behind it and slowly pushing into your enemies, or are you going to recognise that warfare has changed and have a flip towards a mobile warfare doctrine with tanks, armoured cars, and all of those good things? If you choose to go with the Bandits War, you'll also get some nice buffs towards armoured cars. Yeah, armoured cars, I don't see them too much, but they are funny that they're there. Following down the path, you'll have to keep making reforms to the army to ensure you can get it up to snuff, including getting rid of all those debuffs you saw with the national spirit, and heading towards the bottom you'll find yourself having to pick which special forces you're going to go for, including the Fanti dell'Aria, which are the paratroopers which give you the ability to field more paratroopers, as well as give them better organisation and out of supply. You also get given some paratroopers for free, which I think is quite interesting. On the right hand side of the branch, we can see that the focus is going to be on making sure that while previously your military industry wasn't very good at researching things and building things, you're now being able to change that. However, it should be noted that the more focus you put on this side of the branch, you can see that your reconstruction of the industry national spirit is getting an additional consumer good factory percentage each time, meaning the sort of division of attention in terms of factory output is being shifted towards your weaponry. With that, we move on to the Air Force branch with the Italian Royal Air Force, or the Regia Aeronautica. Following the footsteps of the army, the Air Force isn't doing too well with their national spirit either, and it seems like they have a slight reliance on aces to actually get ahead of the game. Regardless, for the most part, it seems to be a very similar to the norm kind of air tree path, except they do give you access to a flying ace or two inside the focus tree with officers of the service role, which I think is cool. I can't think of another focus tree that gives you aces, maybe something in the Soviet tree, but by the by, good to see that, very cool. And again, you see the split that we saw previously, where you're having to pick between a standardization model, where you're trying to get more planes out, versus a specialization model of making some really good planes, but, not as many. Next up, we have Mare Nostrum and the naval branch, because Italy does want to be the true rulers of the Mediterranean. But no surprise here, same issue as previously, the navy, much like every part of the Italian military, is not up to snuff. So in order to modernize your navy, you're going to have to start investing in things like radio and making sure your military high command is all in succession with one another. So you're going to have some debuffs to coordination, detection, spotting speed, all those things to do you'd expect from a lack of radar, as well as some naval doctrine cost, because people aren't really thinking about the future. Following on down the path, you're going to see lots of focuses to do with dockyards, naval bases, production, fixing the national spirit, all the stuff you'd expect, as well as the focus they show here, stockpile fuel, because to run this navy and air force, you're probably going to need some big fuel supplies, so you do get a spirit to help with it, as well as a couple of fuel silos. This might come in useful later, so remember that you can get fuel stockpiles. If you follow down to naval cooperation programs, you get an event to send to Sweden to represent a historical purchase of the Italian escort ships that Italy, I guess, had laying around, giving you some minor consumer goods. Towards the bottom, we see there is an option if you want to get a carrier. Italy didn't have carriers during World War II, but this is your game and you get to decide what you do with Italy. So if you did want to go down the path of a carrier, you have the choice between focusing a lot of effort and attention into building actual carriers, or trying to refit some civilian ships to just create very cheap, very weak cruisers. But, if you didn't want to wait for the cruisers, you have 2 cruisers. Can't complain. And at the very bottom of the tree, you will eventually get to Flotta di Evasion, which is the ultimate focus to help you dominate the seas, giving you dockyards, as you can imagine, all across your empire, as well as giving you some admirals, so you really have a very strong central command. So after some minor deliberation, we have finally arrived at the political side of the focus tree, and you might have noticed we've gone back to grey, and this video is later than it usually would be. That's because looking at that white screen was quite literally hurting my eyes too much, and we had to move back. So this is a re-recording of a recording. Complicated times. As a result, things aren't going to be too much edited from here on out, and I'm just sort of going to be rambling and raving and talking about the new things that are coming. So prepare for some mistakes as we go along. So this branch is known as the Foreign Affairs branch, which is different than the Internal Politics branch, which I think is really good, because previously we've seen places where focus trees mix their foreign affairs and internal branch into a generic political branch. But I found that the best focus trees in the game are the ones that actually separate them. So you've got Mexico with its own independent warpath at the bottom, or the Netherlands, which has its own colonial branch, and Britain, which has its empire branch, which also lets you go to war with Italy and Spain and so on and so forth. So yeah, having its own individual foreign affairs branch is really promising. So to go through, you have, of course, the original option to support Albania. Regardless of which way you go down, whether it's with Germany alone or something else, getting Albania will still be your desire, and you can do so with the Albanian occupation, as well as a focus to get oil, and also expand your influence in the region. On the flip side, we have the Italian-Spanish relations, where, of course, you're going to want to help the Spanish Civil War by supporting the nationalists, assuming you're on the side of Mussolini, and to do so, you're also getting some nice buff towards air volunteers in that region. The 3 central branches are, for the most part, quite familiar. The Pact of Steel is looking pretty much the same, although you can request control of French territories now, so making sure you get what you deserve should be slightly easier, as well as making the Italy First tree a little bit more expanded, and specifically allowing you to choose whether you do war with Greece, war with Turkey, friend with Greece, friend with Turkey, and they're no longer mutually exclusive. It's entirely your choice. Moving on though, we now have the Ratify the Stressor Front, which is the, as we saw through the intro cinematic, an alliance between Britain, France, Italy, that's kind of a remnant thought of post-World War I relations. Not sure it actually would mean anything after the whole betrayal thing, but nevertheless, if you want, you can go to guarantee Austrian independence, which will alienate you from Germany, and then use that as leverage to start negotiating what claims you want, ratify the Stressor Front with Britain and France, and hopefully form that classic alliance to eventually take down Germany and at some point the Soviets. So overall, a really good foreign policy branch. Of course, it's what we remember, but the fact that it's not tied to an ideology makes it, to my mind, even better. But into the politics branch we go, and it's quite an odd one. So, before they even can talk about the politics branch, they have to talk to you about Missiolinis, which are a form of missions that are coming with the Italian focus tree. Now, unlike the Soviet Union purge missions, it's not going to be so devastating if you choose to ignore them. It's more so these are small challenges you can do, and if you choose to go with them, you're going to get some really good buffs, but if you choose to not do them, they're not going to have major penalties, very mild. So as a tutorial nation, it's not going to be too punishing. The first one you're going to encounter is trying to end the war in Ethiopia as quickly as possible for Mussolini, which is what's going to kickstart the focus tree for the political branch of Mussolini. Depending on your ability to complete his request and finish this war is very much so going to lean into what kind of outcome you're going to get for your political path. As we can see here, conquering North Ethiopia and South Ethiopia are kind of instrumentally important to a successful war in Ethiopia, but other things are going to come up, such as building civilian factories, having certain manpower, stockpiling trucks. I guess maybe he just likes his trucks. And of course, something we mentioned earlier, which is increasing your fuel reserves, and this gives you a good idea of the kind of reward and penalty you'll be looking at. So if you haven't in a year got more than 500,000 fuel, you're going to lose a little bit of political power, a little bit of war support, but the buffs, if you do it, are a massive dump of XP, as well as getting the fuel reserves national spirit. So pretty good in my mind. So as I said earlier, depending on your ability to complete that war in Ethiopia, we find ourselves with 3 different options to go down. Solid Progress, Struggling Ethiopia, and the Abyssinian Fiasco. Depending on which one you go for is probably going to impact the outcome of which ideology path you can go for, although it does seem that all 3 options do allow you to go for the historical path. So if you're going to play a historical game, don't worry. If you muck it up or you win too easily or whatever happens, I think you should be able to go historical either way. With Solid Progress, you have to conquer both North and South Ethiopia, so pretty straightforward, and that gets you on track. If you struggle in Ethiopia, you're probably going to make people's doubts about your capability to come into question, and then you're going to see a potential alt-history fascist run or a monarchist run start to happen. People haven't lost faith in the irredentist warmongering ways, but they certainly doubt Mussolini leading the charge. And finally, we have the Abyssinia Fiasco, which they don't really talk about too much, but considering it gives you negative 15% fascism, it's probably the alternative history path for democracy and communism. So make sure you lose that war. Moving on down, as we follow the historical path, you're going to have the option to start trying to decrease a war and keep control of everything by getting a new operative slot. Here we can see a couple of custom bear operatives you might have access to. The Ethiopian, I think that's Libyan, Italian bear king, Francesco de Martini. Furry, not stirred. So, once Triumph in Africa is completed, a new system will be activated called the Balance of Power, which in its very simplified form is a battle between Mussolini being the sole dictator versus the Grand Council of Fascists being this kind of autonomous, unknown, 1994 evil power hiding in the darkness. So, depending on which actions you take, which defocuses you take, which decisions you make, and your ability to win wars is going to flip this balance of power mechanic one way or the other. At the start of the game, you're going to be kind of leaning towards Mussolini, which for the most part appears to be an okay thing because he's going to have a consolidated power, which gives you some nice buffs towards political power gain, stability, war support, all that normal stuff. If you continue all the way to the finish line, you're going to find total dominance of the deuce, which while it continues to give you those good buffs we saw earlier, your army experience, naval experience, all of that is just going to start dipping slowly. So your ability to actually get a good fielded army up much better, as well as getting doctrines and such, is going to be slightly harder. I guess people are starting to have doubts about putting all their faith in one man. On the flip side, you could start to lose faith in Mussolini and go down the council path. This is going to lose you that war support as their glorious leader has soon to be defeated, as well as making the offensive wars you commit also less faith. But at least hiring people into the government is going to be easy because, well, you're siding with the government. Push things too far, however, and you're going to be at risk of having a massive takeover, with the Grand Council of Fascists actually overthrowing Mussolini and eventually sticking themselves in power. I'm not sure who would win in a fight though, the Grand Council or the abandoned Parliament of the United Kingdom. Or maybe that Swiss building that you see leading democratic Switzerland. I wonder if that's still around. And finally, if you push it all the way to the end, you're going to have a bit of a total collapse of the country with a non-aligned civil war. Good luck, because that one could be devastating for your country. Be very careful. So to look at some of the interesting focuses you're going to be dealing with, we do have here Benito Mussolini can become the lion tamer, pushing you closer towards his dictatorship and showing his true masculinity, strength and capability, as well as making sure you can actually control your territory a little easier. If you choose to ignore his macho, powerful and very strong jawline, you could go down the path of choosing political advisors that are going to be much more helpful for what you want. These are the hierarchs we saw earlier. Oh, they've taken my red squares. There was my red square. Anyway, so if you do choose to do that, every time you hire one of these advisors, you're going to get pushed 15% towards the Grand Council. So be very careful. These people are powerful but dangerous. If you don't trust the hierarchs and you think they're all here to stab you in the back, tu Brutus, then Mussolini can, as he historically did, take over positions of the ministry himself as the sole minister of that ministry. It's interesting, but he can become the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Justice, Commerce, I think. You name it, he's good to go. He'll do it all. And one kind of important thing to remember that is, as the balance of power changes, it can also have a tick effect. This can be changed by Benito Mussolini himself, but also losing territory. So if you lose colonial states, it's going to have a minor effect, but people are going to start losing faith in Mussolini. But if you're losing core territory, if Sardinia has fallen, goodness me, your country is in danger of a civil war. I guess the point of that would be that if you're playing as, let's say, Britain or America, and you've taken Sicily, but you can't necessarily push forward, maybe Germany's got too much entrenchment and there's too many mountaineers, the fact that you've taken so many core states of Italy is going to cause them to very quickly lose faith in Benito, and a civil war is going to happen, making that event trigger kind of forced at one point, I would assume, although if it was a player Italy, I'm sure they could take measures to stop it. But anyway, let's say you sided with Benito, things are going well, and you're not having a civil war. You open yourself up to lots of things you can do to bolster yourself, your country, your perks, and everything else. For example, you can see here to live as a lion, which in my opinion has a really cool national spirit icon, is another option to modify your lion tamer trait and make it even better. Or on the flip side, you can also push your policy and economic agenda by making more building slots appear and getting some consumer good factory reduction. In the end game, it doesn't even matter because look at those traits. I think this is more so the fixed version. We did see a version of Ethiopia's leaders' traits, and they looked pretty crazy, but it's good to see that Benito Mussolini has what I'd say is comprehensive traits, although still very powerful. And so at the bottom you finally reach the end goal ambitions of Mussolini, which is that once your country is about as great as you can get it, Mussolini is as cool as he could be without wearing sunglasses, the only thing he has left to do is start conquering things. It seems in this image we've got a colonial empire. Now, if I put my cursor here, this to me looks like Tripoli, with Ben Nabaz in gold, so that's possibly a war with France. Subdue the Sentinels, well, that could be Gibraltar in red, and that could be Egypt. So I'm thinking, what, Britain is going to be the core point there? And of course we do get to see a colonial empire on its own, which is telling you some of the places you're going to get claims on. Egypt, Kenya, Sudan, Djibouti, basically the British and French territories. On a shared path, however, between alt history branches and the Mussolini branch, we see there is the left-hand side, which is going to give you buffs towards internal control, operative slots, and that sort of thing, while on the right side we're getting some options to improve the black shirts, making them stronger and fielding more of them. Strengthening the black shirts specifically can involve turning them into a support battalion, which I think is quite interesting and unique. But eventually, once you do go to strengthen them, you should be able to create far more of them because previously you were capped, and they should have much better organisation. So the last thing this dev diary talks about before ending the things that it's talking about, because my goodness this has gone on so long, is that let's say you eventually find yourself in that civil war. Well, they have added a custom branch for both sides of the civil war, similar to, Vichy France and Free France, although not quite as extensive, that allows you to pick a side and go down that one. So on the left we have the Italian side of liberation, and on the right we have the Social Republic. The left side is going to be about making the fascist side as horrible as possible, making their garrisons higher and resistance growth speed higher, and also giving you some loyalist units to the king to help you in your push. You can, if you also want, try and open the country up to more communist elements, which can help with the resistance and the partisans and the operatives, but, on your head be it if you want this guy running around. You can also get the focus Grand Rivolta Rurale, which is probably pronounced terribly, which gives you weekly manpower plus 1,000 for a year, which is, that's putting the portrait of Karl Marx to shame with that much. But I guess you do have to be in a civil war for it to work. However, let's say you go with the Social Republic, which is probably not too social or republic-y. You have the option of far more controlling methods, getting out as many black shirts as possible to really make sure you stamp down on things. Here we can see counterintelligence is going up, as well as trying to lower the garrison requirements. So both focus trees are kind of cancelling each other out in a way, as well as making so you can buff yourself back up in case things get too bad. And finally, at the end of both focus tree paths, regardless of which one you go down, at the end of the war you are going to become a puppet of whichever is the faction leader. So in the case of Italy as normally, you'd become a puppet of Germany as the Axis, and if you went down the democratic side, or is it monarchist? It's a monarchist, democratic, whatever, the anti-fascist side, you're going to become a puppet of the Allies, and the Allies leader will be Britain, although sometimes America. So you're going to become a puppet of one of those two. What's interesting is that this focus will give you an independence war goal to gain back your territory and full control and autonomy, which I don't think I've seen before. It could be used with Manchukuo, but I don't really remember. But I do hope it means that you don't necessarily have to naval invade Britain to get your independence. I hope it's just they kick all the British out and then tell them to go away. It's going to be annoying that you've just won World War II and get told you're not allowed independence. Ugh. But hopefully they allow you anyway. And so that is that. That dev diary was so long, and I did have access to a document to see it, but the whiteness was hurting my eyes, so I returned to this one. But that aside, all of this looks so good. I am filled with confidence. The Polish focus tree was so good, and I thought the Soviet one was very good. And the things they've done with the Italian tree, to me, are still as good as I would hope, so I'm not disappointed at all. I'm very interested to see what's coming up next. They do say that next time they're going to be talking about Switzerland, so that's what's going to be coming next time. Right then, if you liked, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and yes. Bye.